Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Big Apple Blitz, here with you on another Thursday edition. I am Matt O'Leary, joined by Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going, my friend?
It's going well. I mean, listen, the Giants and the Jets wrapped up mini camp, so now we're in for that long break before training camp. But the mini camp highlights were fun. The mini camp storylines were mostly fun, some of them frustrating and controversial, which I know we're going to discuss. But yeah, it's good to see that practices went well. No major injuries sustained. You know, it's pretty rare that you have major injuries in OTAs and minicamp, but every now and then it does happen. And both of these teams seem to get away completely unscathed for the most part. So it should be some exciting times here as we kind of preview training camp. And then, of course, it just ramps right up into preseason, and the regular season will be here before you know it.
I'm excited for training camp. I can't wait. It's like 40 days until training camp, so I don't know what I'm going to do here for the next month or so. But of course, I think we got to start with the big story of the week, which was Aaron Rodgers not at minicamp. The Jets knew about this for months, that he wasn't going to be here. Still was listed as an unexcused absence. And then the national media went buck wild with it for the last 2 days. It's been a little exhausting trying to cover this from the Jets angle, but I want to hear, you know, as a Giants fan, as an outsider, what your perspective is, and if I am out of touch with this, or just where are you at with Aaron Rodgers missing minicamp?
I think that it's a little bit ridiculous how far blown out of proportion it's been, but I also think it's a little bit ridiculous that he's not there. Like, I think that the whole situation is just ridiculous. He should be there. He shouldn't be on vacation. I understand. I read that he apparently had a vacation planned for a long time when he first started his injury recovery, and so he didn't want to move it. So here he is. At the end of the day, it's just minicamp, which is why I think it's ridiculous how far it's being blown out of proportion. But at the same time, Aaron Rodgers' commitment to the team and to football in general has been in question for pretty much the entirety of the offseason. There were rumors he was going to be on the presidential campaign. Now he's not at minicamp. So again, it's ridiculous that he's not there in some ways, but the way that people are responding to it, like it's the end of the earth and like the Jets are doomed and like Aaron Rodgers is the worst teammate of all time, that's equally ridiculous. So like I said, the whole situation to me is ridiculous. But bottom line, I do feel like Aaron Rodgers should have been at minicamp.
I think that's completely fair. In a perfect world, I'd be like, being completely honest with you, in a perfect world, I think, yes, Aaron Rodgers is there. But I think how this is being reacted to and responded to is just way over the top. Like, everyone's ignoring that Aaron Rodgers was at every single voluntary event and has been there the entire offseason. It'd be a little bit different if, like, he didn't attend OTAs and then also wasn't at minicamp. Then at that point, if you want to question, you know, how involved he is with this team and just how much of an interest level there is, I would totally understand that. But, you know, last year tears the Achilles. Most of the time, the guys who are injured are out on their own rehabbing and not on the sideline or not up in the booth, you know, watching the team. But he traveled with, after he was fully healthy and ready to go, he was at pretty much every single home game. He even traveled with them a few times. So I think it's a little bit unfair how this is being handled. I also drew the comparison to not that long ago, but a lot of people seem to forget, Tom Brady missed 11 days of training camp, which I think is a little bit more, holds a little bit more weight than 2 June practices without any pads. So again, as I said, in a perfect world, do I wish Aaron Rodgers was there? Yes, I think that's a fair way to put it. But at the same time, how it's handled versus how other similar situations are handled is a little bit much for me.
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of all been blown out of proportion. You're right to bring up the Tom Brady comparison because there were certain people on social media saying this is why Tom Brady's always going to be the GOAT. Like Aaron Rodgers can't compare. Brady would never do this to his team. And everybody just forgets that Tom Brady did do this to his team. He did go on a nice 11 practice skipping vacation during training camp a couple seasons ago. Sometimes this thing it just happens. These are your star quarterbacks. They are very high profile. They don't need to be at every single practice and doing every single thing with the team. But Aaron Rodgers has done pretty much everything with the team. Like you said, being on the sidelines, calling plays at times last season, having the headset on, trying to help Zach Wilson when everybody else seemed to give up on Zach Wilson. Aaron Rodgers was fighting for him and trying to help him out from the sideline. So I think that calling Rodgers is a character and abilities as a teammate and as a leader into question over this, it's again just blown out of proportion. It's 2 days of minicamp. Minicamp really isn't that important. Yes, it's mandatory, so you expect everybody to be there. He's not the only player that missed it. Hassan Reddick also wasn't there, as we've discussed a couple times on the show. But it is just minicamp. It's not training camp. If Rodgers isn't there for training camp and there's no good explanation, okay, maybe we could start to have some more serious conversations. But for mini camp right after OTAs, I don't know. I think that it's a little bit of a nothing burger. I don't think it's that huge of a deal. I will say I think that he should have been there, but at the end of the day, it is just mini camp.
I also think Robert Saleh, in a way, didn't help himself with how he announced that Aaron Rodgers wasn't going to be there and called it unexcused and used the word unexcused like 4 times in his answer. I think if he kind of just was like, Aaron, the 2 guys that aren't here, Hassan Reddick, Aaron Rodgers, we've known about Aaron Rodgers' absence for months. This was something that was pre-planned. He let us know well in advance. It's not a concern to us, his teammates, whatever, and like leave it at that. But I think him going out of his way and mentioning it being an unexcused absence, I think kind of only added fuel to the fire of the hysteria reaction from the national side.
I do agree with you, and I've kind of made my feelings about Robert Saleh and this coaching staff pretty clear. I still have question marks about Saleh, his leadership, his ability to kind of control the media narratives. I feel like that has been a problem for the Jets in the past. I feel like he's not always as sharp as he should be. Maybe gives away a little bit too much sometimes when speaking to the media, and it just creates a lot of noisy headlines for the Jets. I mean, it's the Jets, so there's always going to be noisy headlines no matter what you do. But I do think that Robert Saleh invites some of that stuff, and I think this is another good example of that. So I kind of do agree with you in the sense that Saleh did himself no favors, did the team no favors with the way that he kind of discussed the Rodgers situation. Honestly, I think he should have just said, he's absent, we'll take it from there, and just left it at that, kind of adding fuel to the fire with this unexcused thing and just dragging it on in his explanation. Just kind of, like I said, added more fuel to the fire and allowed the media to run with it in a way that they really never should have been able to.
Few comments in here. Our guy Johnny Boy's hanging out with us. Matt and Ant. Oh my God. What do I do? Excuse me. Since A-Rod is not here, is he sick? Is he rehabbing and re-injured? I'm going insane. Help us. LOL. Yeah, it seems like it keeps being referred to as a trip. Now, what is going on this trip? I don't know. We don't really know the details. Also, another reason I don't want to be like super quick to judge is because something relatively similar happened. I believe it was 2 years ago or maybe 3 with the Jets where Mekhi Becton wasn't at. It was either OTAs or minicamp. Forgive me, it was a couple years ago. I don't remember which one. And some people were giving him a hard time. And then we later found out like his wife or girlfriend was like 9 months pregnant. And then he was end up there being for the birth of his daughter. So like, I don't know. People jumped on him and then we found out what the reason was. It's like, okay, like that's legit. So we don't really know what this reason is. Again, it's being referred to as a trip and something that was pre-planned. So I also like don't want to go out and shoot my mouth off and say, oh, he's a bad teammate, this or that, if it is actually something that's, pretty important to him.
It totally could be. And that's private to him, and that's private to the Jets as well. So you do make a great point there. I feel like oftentimes fans are quick to jump onto the necks of their players, their favorite players, or the players that frustrate them the most, but we don't always know the full story. I mean, we've seen this a million times with different players who are absent from certain things or maybe not playing as well as you expect them to, and they've got something going on in their personal life. At the end of the day, these guys are not just players, they are people as well, and that is important to remember, as you kind of mentioned. But with this trip for Rodgers, I have no idea what it is, can't really speculate. I'm wondering if it's a trip like a vacation or if it's a trip like, he's out in the caves again. We'll see. I'm sure that we'll get clarification on that one day if he's hiding away and doing some meditation on this trip. But I doubt that's the case. I think he's probably just got something that he planned a long time ago and it was immovable.
First State Jet says, oh, wait, Chris Jones held out into week 2 and the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. So I don't know if you saw Matt Miller, NFL draft scout, has been going. He's one of the ones who's been going absolutely buck wild about it. He has tweeted multiple times that he's taking the Jets under 9.5 wins after Aaron Rodgers has missed the 2 days of June practice. But again, like holding out like comparable situations. Now, granted, having Patrick Mahomes and being the favorite and winning the year prior obviously helps your cause. And the Jets having this long playoff drought, like I get from an optics perspective, not great. But like, I don't know, stuff like this happens. You get holdouts, guys miss June, August, even weeks of the season, and then, teams end up being okay. So I just have a really hard time looking at June 11th and 12th practices and Rodgers not being there for these non-padded practices and going, oh, well, I thought they were 11 or 12 win team and a playoff contender, and now I think they're going to stink because of it. Like, that just seems crazy.
It is crazy. And like I keep saying, it's just 2 days of mini camp. He's not missing training camp. There's no pads on. It's just a little bit of throwing in shorts and t-shirts, which he can do with his receivers between now and then anyway. I'm sure that there will be private workouts planned between the quarterback and some of the receivers, which is totally allowed and totally encouraged by most teams. You see that happen often. I know Daniel Jones, over the past 5 years that he's been the quarterback, he often does plan something between now and training camp with the receivers. They usually go out to Charlotte near Duke and they train all together and they get some throwing sessions in. Rodgers might have something like that planned with all of the Jets receivers. It's totally possible. So him not being there for the 2 days of minicamp, it's not the end of the world. And I think that Matt Miller and any of the other analysts who are overreacting to this and saying that the Jets aren't going to win that many games this year because Rodgers missed 2 days of minicamp, like, let's calm down. Let's seriously just take a step back and realize what we're talking about. 2 days of throwing in shorts and t-shirts missed. That's it. Nothing that serious. In fact, Rodgers probably wouldn't be doing all of the team drills and throwing anyway because he is still coming off of the injury. So even if he is healthy, relatively healthy, close to 100%, he's probably not a full participant in minicamp anyways, and it doesn't matter because being a full participant in practice only matters once you get to training camp and so on and so forth. So again, this whole thing, it's been blown out of proportion. The reactions have been extreme from some of the people in the media. I get it. It's concerning. It's Aaron Rodgers, so there's going to be buzz no matter what he does, but this is just ridiculous. It's just a mini camp. It's not training camp. I think everybody needs to take a chill pill.
So Brees Hall was there but didn't practice the last 2 days. Do we now have to take the under on his yardage total because he wasn't a participant at minicamp?
I guess according to the logic of Matt Miller and some of the other analysts, that's the way it works. So
apparently, just craziness, absolute craziness. So we had to start with that one. Let's get to some New York Giants storylines. But first, before we get into that, we talked about it on Monday. We're like, let's hope that we see some slow motion throws. And how about it? You tweeted out your guy, the official QB1 of Big Apple Blitz, Tommy DeVito, out there slinging the rock.
You love to see it. You absolutely love to see it. We've been thirsting for some Tommy DeVito slow-mo content, and we got it. It's what you'll love to see. The little fadeaway dime, sure, a little wobbly ball, right in stride, hitting the rookie Theo Johnson. Perfect pass, and I'm hyped up. That's my QB1. That's my future Super Bowl MVP, Tommy DeVito, at least in my hopes and dreams. And I'm just excited because everything that I've seen, Tommy DeVito has been really stellar at Giants practice in the spring. I saw OTAs. He looked better than Drew Lock in many of the practices, and I think that was a trend that continued with the first 2 days of minicamp. Again, it's just minicamp, throwing in shorts and t-shirts. But once the pads come on during training camp, if Tommy DeVito continues to outperform Drew Lock, I think he's going to make a case for QB2 on this roster. Drew Lock only on a 1-year, $5 million deal. Who cares if he's QB2 or QB3? But Tommy DeVito, again, I keep saying it, don't rule out the kid. He's looked impressive all spring. He looked impressive in the few starts that he got last year. I think that there's still potential there. He's still young, only entering his second season. And any slow-mo clip that I see of him just gets me so excited. And honestly, there's only a few things that are getting me excited for this upcoming season with the Giants. There's no Daniel Jones slow-mo clips. I could tell you that. Nothing like that gets me excited.
Why not?
But the Malik Neighbors one-handed catches and the Tommy DeVito dimes, those are the things that have me juiced up for the season.
I like it. I really do. There you go. QB1 to now tight end 1 in Theo Johnson, potentially.
I
No?
hope so. And listen, with Theo Johnson, I think Darren Waller's retirement really opened up a huge opportunity for him, not only because he's obviously Darren Waller's no longer in the lineup. They still have Daniel Bellinger. You would assume that he's the tight end 2 behind Waller, but because of the playing style of Johnson and how similar it was to Darren Waller, I think that he's actually in line to take that starting job from Daniel Bellinger. And he's apparently been really impressive at these practices. So his athleticism, his ability to make plays vertically up the middle of the field, I really like Theo Johnson. And yeah, I'm hoping that Tommy DeVito is the QB1 who throws him the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl.
There you go. Let's get into some Tre Herndon. He was brought into mini camp on a tryout, ends up getting a contract. The veteran corner spent, the early part of his career in Jacksonville from 2018 through this past season. What's your thoughts on Herndon, the signing, and where you expect him to play?
Yeah, I don't know if I do expect Herndon to play. I feel like this is just the Giants adding some depth to the cornerback room and hopefully finding a guy who, if there are any injuries during training camp or any struggles from some of these young players who are expected to start, Herndon can go ahead and get some playing time, get some reps, and maybe start. But I think that this is kind of the underwhelming signing for Giants fans. A lot of them were like, oh, Darren Waller's retiring. Let's go sign Stephon Gilmore. And I made the argument recently on Fireside Giants that would be a kind of silly decision for the New York Giants. They've been very adamant about developing young talent. They've been very clear that they want these young guys to step into these starting roles. And I think for a guy like Cordell Flott, you're finally getting this opportunity to be the team's CB2. If the Giants were to just go ahead and sign Stephon Gilmore, well, that really takes the wind out of Cordell Flott's sails, and going into training camp, a lot of those practice reps that some of these young guys like Flott or Nick McLeod, some of these reps that these guys would have been getting, they're going to get turned over to a Stephon Gilmore. But now that you sign a Tre Herndon, I don't really think that takes snaps away from a Cordell Flott or anybody else. I think that he just gets added into the mix with some of the backup corners. And hey, if there's some struggles or injuries, he'll move up the depth chart. He's a quality veteran cornerback. He's made some really impressive plays in the past in his NFL career with the Jaguars. He's a good player, but he's not necessarily a threat to some of these other guys competing for roster spots. And I think that's a good thing. I get the appeal to bringing in a guy like a Stephon Gilmore or some other higher end cornerback to immediately start. I understand the appeal, but at the end of the day, that's a signing you don't make now. You make that after training camp has already begun and you see what you have on your roster once the pads come on. So I like this signing from the Giants. I think that this is my preferred way of addressing the position, adding depth rather than an immediate starter. This way, those young guys still get their practice reps and still have the opportunity to develop.
Yeah, I like the addition as well. And like he has, some significant playing time under his belt, which is good. Like if for whatever reason the youngsters just aren't ready yet, then you could turn yourself to the veteran. And also like he's played both outside corner and slot corner. The last couple of years, he's kind of moved and played a little bit more in the slot, as earlier in his career, he was playing more outside corner. So I'm interested to see like where they end up utilizing him and seeing his best use. I guess it's probably dependent on the younger guys, I would guess, right? And see like which guy's performing better, and maybe that determines where Herndon ends up.
Right. I think that's exactly what it is. And the Giants do have a lot of young guys who are competing for positions. Cordell Flott, again, there's so much pressure on his shoulders to step up as a player who was playing slot cornerback for the first 2 seasons of his career. Now they're moving him to the outside in year 3. Very young, very thin frame on Cordell Flott. Who knows how he holds up at that outside cornerback spot? Providing yourself a little bit of insurance and a veteran like Tre Herndon is just the smart move. And again, it's not like you're signing someone who's immediately overtaking Cordell Flott's position at CB2. You're just signing a guy for insurance purposes, and that's really important. The Giants don't have enough depth across this roster, and I know that's something that we've kind of discussed before on the show, where we've said the starting lineup isn't all that bad. There are some quality pieces. There are some young guys who, if they take that step forward, this could be a decent team. But behind those players, knowing that injuries are inevitable, you do feel a little bit uneasy looking at the depth on this team. So for Herndon, who's played a lot in the NFL and has played some quality snaps across teams as a veteran, it's very important to bring a guy like that in, give yourself that insurance, just in case these young guys struggle, maybe one of them gets hurt, it's very important stuff to have these veterans in the building and building towards, of course, making a more complete roster with depth as well.
On the Our Lads depth chart, right now they have Herndon listed as the backup nickel. They have Flott as the starting outside corner, Banks as the other, and Drew Phillips as the starting nickel back. If you're just from, I guess, a prediction standpoint, do you think that's how it ends up playing out, or do you see it another way?
I think it probably ends up playing out that way. The only thing that I could see is if Nick McLeod impresses during training camp. He's a player that I like. He's a player that I thought might have entered the summer with an edge over Cordell Flott for that CB2 job. Instead, the Giants are rolling with Flott, expecting him to take over that starting job. But McLeod looked good last year in the little bit of playing time that he got. So I could see him having an impressive summer of practices and moving up the depth chart. But with Andrew Phillips in the slot, the Giants definitely needed some depth behind him. He's a rookie. Who knows how rookies are going to perform immediately when they're thrust into a starting position. The Giants are putting a lot of pressure on young players and rookies in particular. So having a little bit of depth behind Andrew Phillips is important. Tre Herndon being one of those players that could step up if they need him to. Also, Darnay Holmes, I've read that he was practicing both slot and outside cornerback recently. I don't know what the future for Darnay Holmes exactly holds. He's someone who's been on the roster bubble for each of the last 3 seasons. So I think just adding in a little bit more depth and seeing who the best option is as that backup slot cornerback is good practice. And again, Herndon having that ability to step in there for Andrew Phillips if an injury or struggles arise, that is very important.
Yeah, and for Andrew Phillips, he was a third rounder from this year. It feels like that it's asking a lot. Not saying that he can't handle it, but asking or assuming a third rounder could come in and start for you right away. It doesn't always work out to be the case. So having a veteran behind that, maybe the Giants feel a little bit more comfortable with, or really having two, I guess, and Tre Herndon and, Darnay Holmes at this point was drafted in 2020. It's, a long time ago now. So he'd have to be considered a vet too. So moral of the story is they have some options there at slot corner if it doesn't work out with their third round pick.
Yeah, and I think that the Giants kind of learned their lesson last year. Probably didn't have enough options going into the regular season. They had rookie Trey Hawkins, 6th-round pick, starting on the outside last year. Tried to move Adoree Jackson into the slot. Failed experiment through the first 3 weeks of the season. It was really bad. They had to make a switch, but they didn't really have a lot of depth in their secondary. So when they had to move guys around or take guys out of the lineup and put other guys in, there was a clear drop-off in talent and consistency, and it was just a real mess in the Giants secondary last year. So I think adding some more depth throughout training camp, I don't think this is the only signing that they're going to make in the secondary. I think once we get to training camp, get to some preseason cuts and waiver wire pickups, there's probably going to be more depth in the secondary added for the Giants. But again, I think they just really learned the tough lesson last year with the way that they had to move that secondary around, and it created a whole bunch of problems for them because of the inexperience that they had. So it's very important that they do add some veteran depth in there this offseason.
I pulled up the Giants depth chart and I didn't realize they must have just recently added my guy, Long Island legend, Elijah Riley, defensive back from Army, on the back end of this roster, listed as their third strong safety right now.
Yeah, I don't know much about him, truthfully. I still do have to do some brushing up on the back end of this Giants roster and take a closer look at some of these guys, which I, of course, will do during training camp. But, like I said, there's a lack of depth on this team. So some of these guys that maybe don't know much about being on the back end of this roster, who knows if they make it. Again, with that $11.6 million that they got from Darren Waller, maybe they do add a couple more veteran pieces, and that's probably good practice for this Giants team, considering how young they are on the defense. But at the end of the day, we are not expecting this team to be like an immediate playoff contender. So knowing that they don't have a ton of depth, it's not really shocking when you take a look at this depth chart and realize that there are some pretty serious struggles all over the roster.
Absolutely. So with that, let's get into our next topic, back to the New York Jets. As yesterday at the final day of mini camp, DJ Reed was up at the podium and was asked about his contract, and he said this quote, I'm pulling it up right now: "The ball's in the Jets court. I love being here, but I'm not stressing it." From DJ Reed on his contract. Now, I'm a really big fan of Reed. I think he's been a really, really good number 2 corner for the New York Jets the last 2 years, and I think he would be a number 1 corner on, a good chunk of teams in the league this year. Unfortunately, the Jets have a decision to make, and I believe we've discussed it on this show before in the past, but after this year, both DJ Reed and Michael Carter, their slot corner, are, unrestricted free agents. Unfortunately, with just how, it's a capped sport and all the other moves and things the Jets have to do, I don't know how realistic it is to retain both of those guys. And if the Jets were to choose one, as much as it stings, unfortunately, I think I would choose Michael Carter. He's younger. Slot corners usually tend to make less money in comparison. I think, top slot corners making $10, $11 million on an AAV. For a guy like DJ Reed, someone in free agency, I think, will pay him like a number 1 corner, and that's, 15 plus million at the floor. Maybe it's closer to $20 million. And, if Sauce Gardner is going to get a big contract after this year or the following year, I just don't know how they swing both of those things.
DJ Reed feels like the perfect 2025 offseason splash signing for the New York Giants after they get rid of the Daniel Jones contract. I just have to throw that out there. I mean, we just went on this whole thing about how they don't have a ton of depth and no experienced starters in the secondary and a lot of question marks around Cordell Flott and these other guys. Bringing in a really solid cornerback in free agency is something that Giants fans wanted to see happen this offseason. Couldn't work out due to the salary cap. But next offseason, could make a lot of sense. That could be interesting. But I know we've kind of had this discussion before about Reed versus Carter and kind of the allocation of funds to the outside cornerback spot, to the slot cornerback spot. I do think you're right in the sense that re-signing Carter for the cheaper deal, but still being one of the top slots in the NFL, that's probably the right way to go. But I do find that quote from Reed kind of eye-opening, that not only did he say that the ball is in the Jets' courts, but he also said, I'm not stressing it. And I guess I'd have to hear how he said it, but kind of idea that he's just not stressing whether or not he returns to the Jets kind of indicates that maybe he's open to a change and probably isn't super eager to re-sign with the team. I think that players are pretty open when they do want to return to a team and saying that almost immediately. But him just putting the ball in the Jets' court and saying that he's not stressing, it feels to me like whatever happens, happens. And he might not be extra motivated to get a deal done and stay in New York. He could be interested in playing elsewhere.
Yeah, which is, I get it from his side. Again, he's not going to ever be a number 1 corner here with the, drafting Sauce Gardner. They drafted Sauce the first year that they signed him in free agency. He's been a very good running mate, and, this will be their 3rd year playing together. It's just, I don't know if he's ever going to get the opportunity that he's maybe looking for. For the Giants, I think, as you mentioned, that'd be a great addition. I would highly recommend it. I think he's, in my opinion, close to top 15 corner in football. Adding him to your team is obviously a win. Again, unfortunately, in a capped sport, you have to make the difficult decisions. And if you want to be able to pay and retain your 2022 draft class, which is, mostly the core of this team, then you're going to make the tough decisions on a DJ Reed or Hassan Reddick or Tyler Conklin or some of these other veterans who, are probably due for a pay increase when, you're going to have to pay $20+ million for Sauce and Garrett Wilson. And, Breece Hall is going to make big money if he has another big year in 2024. So unfortunately, just don't think it's feasible for the Jets to retain him. But I think he's done, since he's been here, I think he's been a really, really good player. And I think he's handled himself well too. Like, you really can't ask for too much more out of DJ Reed.
I agree with you. And this is kind of a situation that good teams find themselves in where sometimes they draft too well or sign too well. And then you have to sign players to contracts. And because of the salary cap, you just can't do it. I think it's something that we're seeing right now with the Dallas Cowboys. It's actually absurd to me that they've drafted too well, hitting on 4th round pick Dak Prescott, of course, the grand slam that was CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons in back-to-back draft classes. Those 3 players, if you want to re-sign them, it's going to cost you like $120 million for just the 3 of them. There goes 40 to 50% of your salary cap space on 3 players. The teams that draft really well obviously build perennial postseason contenders. The Cowboys wouldn't be the perennial postseason contenders that they are without those 3 guys. But now keeping those 3 guys, much easier said than done. Jets running into similar problems. A lot of talent in that secondary. You can't give contracts to all three of those guys. You can't give contracts to Reed, Carter, and Gardner. You got to pick probably 2 out of the 3 and then go from there and allocate your funds elsewhere. You can't just throw all your money into one position group. It needs to be diversified. So the Giants haven't had this problem in recent years because they don't draft well. So I'm envious of the teams that have these good problems. But the Jets are one of these teams that do have these good problems because they have such a good roster. So at the end of the day, even though it's like a little bit difficult to see the future here and project who gets the contract, who doesn't, what it looks like, who sticks around, who goes, those things are difficult to project. But really, at the end of the day, it is a good problem, and it does highlight the fact that this is a really well-built roster with a lot of depth and a lot of talent at the top.
Yeah, and you're right. Like for the Giants not having it right now, and for a long time, the Jets didn't have that. They went on a really long stretch of not giving first-round picks a second contract. The last one that they did that with was Muhammad Wilkerson before Quinnen Williams in 2019, but before that was Muhammad Wilkerson, and that was the 2011 draft. Like, so from 2012 through 2018, none of those guys were getting second contracts, which is just absolutely absurd. But now you have, 3 or 4 guys from one draft class that you probably want to give second contracts to and that are going to be expensive. And as First State Jets chimes in and says, can't have all pros at every position under contract, got to cut loose and replace with cheap youth. Luckily for this Jets team and this Jets coaching staff, they deserve the benefit of the doubt on the defensive side of the ball. So if they do have to move on from DJ Reed, I am fairly confident that they could find a relatively cheap, good option to fill in as their number 2 corner to pair with Michael Carter in the slot and Sauce Gardner as their number 1.
Yeah, and not only credit to the coaching staff and its ability to develop, but I also think you do have to give credit to the front office because not only have they uncovered all of this talent and established such a well-built roster, but they've also been really proactive at adding young players at positions of strength so that when those players move on, you have someone waiting in the wings. And that's what the best sports teams and especially the best NFL teams do. So when you've got really good cornerback talent, but then you go ahead and you draft some of the depth pieces. Name is slipping me, but there is a cornerback who's been popping out, young player at Jets practice.
Quantez Stiggers, baby.
There you go. Stiggers now looking like he could potentially be a starter in a couple years' time, or maybe even immediately if he needed to be. That's how good football teams are built. You have all this talent at the top, but you're not afraid to draft players at positions of strength, develop them, and have them take over so that you can save some money down the line and not have to pay everybody. Again, this is something that the Giants have not been doing. They have not been drafting at positions of strength. The Giants have had so many needs year to year, so many holes on their roster and in their starting lineup that they have to draft for needs. And that ultimately creates holes down the line because when those players need those second contracts, who do you have waiting in the wings? Nobody. But the Jets instead are being proactive and they are building this roster according to like the championship model. This is something that we've seen so many good teams do. If you want to bring up the Chiefs, if you want to bring up the Eagles even, hate to bring them up, but they're really good at that. They draft offensive linemen and stack them on top of one another. Injury rises. Okay, well, they have this rookie from a couple years ago who's now developed, ready to step in, play well in spots. That's a team that you can make as a really good example, and there are many others. But the Jets following that model, really building out a championship roster. Again, you're going to have to move on from some players, but at least you know that this coaching staff has the ability to develop some young players and that they have players waiting in the wing for those opportunities.
Absolutely. Comment from Johnny Boy before we get into our final Giants topic. He says, I think also him saying that I'm good on money is a huge clue. He might take a hometown discount salary. What Aaron did means a lot to this team with his salary. Yeah, last offseason, Aaron Rodgers reworked his contract. It was the largest pay cut in sports. That's not mentioned, of course, only the missing the 2 days of minicamp. But for DJ Reed, I think the only way he stays is if he does take a under market value discount. If he does that, then fine. I'd be happy because I think DJ Reed's a good player. But if he goes to the open, if he wants to test the open market, goes out there, gets a contract that pays him $18 million a year, I don't blame him one bit for that. And I just don't think the Jets could afford it.
Yeah, you're probably right. Again, the salary cap really does complicate things. And like I said, when you draft really well and sign really well, you're going to run into problems and you're going to have to move on from high quality players. But that is also why the compensatory pick formula exists. So even if they do let Reed go next offseason to the Giants, hopefully, and he ends up becoming an all-pro cornerback for us, at least the Jets will be able to get some sort of compensatory pick in return next offseason.
I like the way you think. You're always trying to spin it as a positive spin for the Giants, but I'd be excited for Reed. He wouldn't have to move. At least he could stay local.
Right, saves on moving costs is a big kind of motivator, not only for the player but even for the team. The team has to pay those moving costs. If he was going from New York all the way to LA, that's a whole lot of moving costs to move all of his furniture and equipment and everything like that. Not so much if he's just moving from one locker room to the next. So, a little bit of a motivating factor there, I would assume, for the Giants.
What a spin. I love it. What a spin. Let's get into Mike Kafka and his play calling. He seemed to share some thoughts about his role this year with the New York Giants.
Yeah, he seemed kind of indifferent to the idea that the Giants might be moving on from him as a play caller. Obviously, Kafka received a promotion this offseason, but it feels like a demotion. He's now the assistant head coach. Feel like they gave him that title just to prevent him from leaving for another team. Feel like they're trying to give him an opportunity to audition for a head coaching job this season. But at the end of the day, Kafka losing play calling duties makes his promotion feel like a demotion. And again, it's not confirmed yet that Brian Dable is going to be calling the plays, but all signs kind of point that way. That is the indication. And for Kafka, I think that we could see his role completely shift here. Last 2 years, rather, he's been in the box, eye in the sky, calling the plays and watching the game from up there. And I think if he's no longer calling the plays, he doesn't need to be up there. He can probably have a more hands-on approach on the sidelines and do some more coaching and coordinating on game days. And I think that's going to be important because it felt like the sidelines were running amok a few times last year for the Giants. Whether you want to blame Brian Dable or blame leadership, I don't know. I don't care. But I do think that Mike Kafka being on the sideline could have helped them. And I know that's something that I did discuss on Fireside Giants when we were having so many questions about Mike Kafka and his play calling and his duties as the play caller. I was bringing up like, hey, there are other teams that have had this eye in the sky, move them to the sideline. The San Francisco 49ers, excellent example. Their defensive coordinator was in the box. The defense started really struggling. They moved them to the sideline. That defense went on an absolute tear for the final 5 weeks of the season and into the postseason, bringing them all the way to the Super Bowl. So sometimes it really does make that big of a difference to have the coach on the sideline, whether he's calling the plays or not. It's just impactful to have your offensive coordinator, I feel, on the sideline coaching up the players on game days. So I'm wondering if this leads to Mike Kafka moving down to the sideline if he isn't calling the plays anymore. And overall, I am curious to see what this looks like. He said that it could be a collaborative approach to play calling. Again, he doesn't seem too upset that he might lose the play calling duties. And I know that he is trying to audition to hopefully get a head coaching job next offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out for him, for Brian Dable as well. But really, this Giants offense does have a whole lot more talent. So whoever's calling the plays should be able to put up more than 15 points per game like last season, whether that's Kafka or Brian Dable. I'm expecting there to be some significant improvements to the offense.
Yeah, I just think it would be tough for Kafka to get that next job and move up to be a head coach if he isn't calling the plays and having success too, which with the Giants quarterback room, it might be challenging for them to be a top half of the league offense. And I think that's probably what you need. One, play calling, and two, being a top half of the league offense and getting a job from that. But I do like your idea that you mentioned of bringing him down to the sideline, and was wondering if you think that would mean that the new Giants defensive coordinator Shane Bowen would go upstairs then, and you'd rather have Kafka on the sideline.
So the way that I understand is Shane Bowen has always been on the sideline working closely with the head coach and Mike Vrabel. He's always been a play caller from the sideline. So I would assume that he maintains that, continues to call the plays on the sideline and be there present on game days. But I just think that it's probably time for a switch up with Kafka. It didn't work last year with him in the sky or in the press box, rather. I think getting him on the sidelines would be really important. And I do think, to the point that you made about him struggling to get a head coaching job if he's not calling the plays, I think there's a way that you can spin it where, let's say the Giants offense is significantly improved next year and Brian Dable's calling the plays. the Giants can absolutely do some sort of behind the scenes look and say, hey, Kafka really took on a different role, more of a leadership managerial role than a hands-on play calling role. And that's more translatable to being a head coach than being a good play caller is. So there is a way that they could spin it. And again, prop him up and put him in this position to audition for head coaching jobs. Say, hey, rather than focusing on calling the plays, he focused on his duties as assistant head coach. The games ran more smoothly. The quality control was there because of Mike Kafka, and therefore he's more suited for a head coaching job now than he even was last offseason when teams were really looking at him for that job. So, yeah, there are definitely certain ways to spin the narrative on Kafka, but it is all predicated on how well the Giants offense performs this year. And again, they need to improve, and that's going to be a struggle, like you said, due to the quarterback situation. Who knows who's going to be starting throughout the year? Obviously, Daniel Jones opening the year as a starter. Will he end the year as a starter? I'm not super confident, but yeah, right. Our boy got to end the year as a starter, got to become the Super Bowl winning quarterback. But who knows? If the offense does improve, I think that Kafka can get a lot of credit for it, even if he isn't calling the plays, depending on how the Giants spin the narrative.
Yeah. There we go. I do like that point that you add there, though, about having it spun as him taking on a more leadership role. I think that would be the way to do it if he's looking to take that next step, which I'm sure he is. He moved up the ranks and is an offensive coordinator. Probably now wants to be a head coach, similar for the Jets and their defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. I'm sure he wants to take that next step and to become a head coach. We got a couple comments from Johnny in here that I wanted to toss up. First one is the most important topic. Tomorrow's Johnny's birthday on Flag Day. So shout out to Johnny Boy. Happy birthday, Johnny Boy. A loyal listener, always in here in the chat. So happy birthday, my friend. Hope you enjoy it.
Yes, sir. Happy early birthday, Johnny. Hope you have a great one.
And the second one is that the Jets signed one of their tryout guys, Takk McKinley, who was a 2017 first-round pick with the Atlanta Falcons. So adding some depth there to the edge room, which is, they kind of need that now, one, with the Haason Reddick holdout, but also losing Bryce Huff in free agency and then trading away John Franklin Myers. There's going to be a bit of a competition for that, the final few spots at that position.
Yeah, really solid here. Depth signing. Instant reaction is that I like this move, again, with Haason Reddick not being present at mandatory minicamp. If he is absent for a few of those training camp practices, you need an extra body. You need a rotational pass rusher. Takk McKinley can absolutely be that for you. He's been an effective rotational guy for teams throughout his career. Again, not somebody that you depend on play by play and as a full-time starter throughout a season, but in a rotation and as a reserve piece, the Jets do need some added depth after trading away John Franklin Myers, as you mentioned. So it is an important move, and I think that this is a good one that, could really benefit the team once they do get into training camp.
Yeah, and if he's your fifth guy, and the Jets in the Robert Saleh era, all 3 years so far, have carried 6 edge rushers. So I would imagine that they're going to want to carry, probably close to that number again. If he's your fifth or sixth guy, okay, I'm good with that. His best year was probably his rookie. I guess his second year. He had 7 sacks his second season in 2018. And then pretty much ever since then, it's kind of just been a rotational guy. And didn't play in 2023. But who knows? If they saw something there that they liked, great. Bring him in for training camp. If he plays well, fantastic. If not, you cut him, you move on, and it's no big deal.
Absolutely. I think that's really important for fans to keep in mind with any of these signings. The Tre Herndon one as well for the Giants. Any of these signings that happen now in June doesn't mean the player is going to be on the roster in September. Just means that they're getting an extra body in there and adding some potential depth in case of any injuries or struggles during training camp. So it's really important to bring in camp bodies, Takk McKinley being one. And like I said, it's very important now with a player who may or may not be practicing some days with Haason Reddick, having an extra body out there so that you can go through your drills properly. Very important just to have able and ready players.
Absolutely. Anything else on mini camp for either the Jets or the Giants before we get out of here on this lovely Thursday morning?
Last thing I'll say is that my excitement is starting to build for this Giants offense, and in particular because of the receiving core. Not only does Malik Neighbors look like an absolute stud, he's been torching everybody and making highlight grab after highlight grab, but also Jalen Hyatt's been scoring a lot of touchdowns. We've been seeing Darius Slayton did get banged up, but it seems like it's something minor and he'll be okay. And we've also been seeing Wan'Dale Robinson. He's apparently hitting new highs on the GPS or on the miles per hour. He's been going really, really fast and moving much quicker than ever. Of course, last season began to break out, but was coming off of an ACL tear from 2022. Now he's back to full strength and says that he feels faster and quicker than ever. And it's shown up because he's been torching players and taking slant routes to the house at minicamp and OTAs. So a lot of excitement generating for this receiving core. It's all going to depend on whether or not the quarterbacks can get the ball into the hands of these receivers. Big question marks about Daniel Jones, of course, but this receiving core, better than he's ever had throughout his career. No excuses, in my opinion. I think it's going to be really important to see how this offense ends up shaping out, but I'm definitely getting really excited about the wide receiver talent that the Giants have this year.
Yeah, as you should. I like that Giants wide receiver room. I think it has some nice depth there, and definitely going to have a number one receiver with Malik Neighbors. For me, I am excited for another month of Aaron Rodgers narratives before we get on the football field. Always a fun time breaking that stuff down and covering that on the channel. So it's going to get a little bit quiet right now, which is okay, but that doesn't mean we're going anywhere. We're back on Monday with another episode, Anthony. So think hard of topics for Monday. We're going to need it.
Will do. I'll try and pinpoint any storylines that I can for this Giants team. Again, got a long road ahead of training camp, but definitely some storylines to preview and some players to take a look at before we get to training camp who might be competing for positions. So it'll be an interesting summer as we ramp up into the training camp period.
Absolutely, guys. That's going to do it for us on this episode. Please make sure to subscribe if you're not already subbed. Make sure to sub up our Jets content over at Matt O'Leary NY and the Giants content for Anthony over on Fireside Giants. But that's going to do it for us. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we'll catch you guys next time.